Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be utterly forgotten by the galaxy, trapped in a place where hope itself is considered a crime? That is the fate of anyone who steps onto a prison world in the grim darkness of the Warhammer 40K universe. There is no trial, no mercy, only the iron certainty that your existence has been deemed expendable. When I arrived, I understood immediately. This was a place where humanity's laws did not apply, where the Imperium's justice was a blunt instrument, and where survival demanded the sacrifice of every ounce of pride, compassion, and innocence. The moment they seized me, I was stripped of everything familiar, my name, my rank, my identity reduced to a number etched onto my wrist. The transport was silent, save for the mechanical groaning of the ship as it tore through the void. Outside, I could catch fleeting glimpses of the prison world below, jagged spires of blackened metal, smoke-choked skies, rivers of molten industry carving the surface like the veins of some vast, malevolent organism. It was a world designed not merely to contain, but to break. When I stepped onto the ground, the air hit me like a physical force, thick with chemical ash, metallic tang, and the faint, nauseating smell of decay. The prisoners around me shuffled silently, their eyes hollow, their expressions erased by years of ceaseless labor and torment. Some muttered prayers to gods I could not name, others stared into the void, murmuring to themselves as if speaking to a part of their minds the guards could not touch. And then there were those who did not speak at all, moving like shadows, their presence a living warning of what this place could do to a soul. A figure approached me, a fellow prisoner, gaunt, scarred, and wary. "You're new," he said in a low voice that carried the weight of countless lost years. "Remember this, hope is a weapon here, and it will get you killed faster than the guards ever could." His words sank into me like cold iron, a truth I would come to understand far too soon. In the world of Warhammer 40K prisons, survival was not about strength or cunning alone, it was about navigating a labyrinth of cruelty, betrayal, and despair that could strip away your humanity piece by piece. From the first moments, the rules were clear: speak only when spoken to, work without pause, and trust no one. Guards watched from every height, their faces hidden behind respirators and helmets, their weapons a permanent reminder that life and death were entirely in their hands. The architecture itself seemed designed to crush the spirit: endless corridors of blackened steel, ceilings lost in shadow, and floors that shook under the weight of machinery that roared without end. Even the sun, when it pierced the smog, offered no warmth, only a harsh, pale reminder of the world that existed beyond these walls, a world I could no longer reach. And yet, in the midst of this crushing despair, I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, the first pangs of fear that went beyond mere survival. Fear of what I might become, fear of the choices I would be forced to make, and fear of the secrets the prison held, secrets that would test not only my body, but my mind. Because here, in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, imprisonment was more than physical confinement, it was a journey into the abyss of the soul, and the abyss looked back with a gaze that promised to consume me entirely. The first sunrise, or what passed for one through the smoke-choked skies, did nothing to lift the darkness in my chest. Life in the prison was not a life at all, but an unending cycle of suffering measured in hours that blurred together. From the moment we were aroused by the harsh, mechanical clang of the alarms, every action was dictated by labor, punishment, and the ever-present threat of death. The work was relentless, hauling molten ore, scraping machinery coated in corrosive sludge, and performing tasks that seemed designed not for productivity, but for the slow erosion of body and spirit. Every misstep, every hesitation, no matter how small, was met with punishment, often public, often cruel, always humiliating. Hunger gnawed constantly, a physical reminder that sustenance here was rationed like hope itself. The meager meals were barely edible: slimy gruel, synthetic protein blocks, water that tasted of metal and rust. Yet even starvation was secondary to the real terror: the guards. Towering figures in blackened ceramide armor patrolled without pause, their respirators masking any hint of emotion. Their eyes, when visible, glowed faintly, as if attuned to the faintest tremor of fear. One wrong glance, one accidental act of defiance, and they would strike without hesitation, leaving your body mangled as a warning to the rest. Among the prisoners, hierarchies emerged not from skill or morality, but from ruthlessness. Some had learned to endure by submission, others by cruelty, and a few had descended into a madness that made them unpredictable and dangerous. I observed in silence as arguments erupted over scraps of food, beds in overcrowded cells, or perceived slights. Fights were swift, vicious, and often ended with a death that no one would remember tomorrow. In these moments, it became clear that the prison did not simply punish, it corrupted. It stripped away the veneer of civilization, leaving only raw, brutal survival instincts. The horrors were not merely physical. The guards employed punishments that toyed with the mind, cells designed to amplify isolation, devices that inflicted excruciating pain without killing, and ritualized interrogations that blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Some prisoners were subjected to experiments, warp-infused devices, chemical agents, psychic torments, that left them catatonic, screaming, or worse. And yet, the worst terror was the uncertainty. Every day brought the potential for sudden death, for someone to vanish without trace, or for the prison itself to unleash horrors beyond comprehension. Despite all this, the flicker of humanity persisted in whispers and fleeting acts of defiance. Prisoners would share morsels of food, offer quiet warnings, or trade stories of life before capture. These small connections were dangerous, but they were also a lifeline, a reminder that even in a place designed to destroy, some fragments of the soul could endure. And still, fear was constant, suffocating. One misstep could obliterate not just your body, but the fragile bonds you clung to for sanity. By the end of the first cycle of labor, when my muscles ached and my mind teetered on the edge of despair, I realized the truth. This prison was not meant to contain humanity, it was designed to erase it. Survival demanded vigilance, cunning, and a willingness to embrace darkness. The question that lingered in my mind was no longer whether I would survive, but what I would become if I did. And in the grim expanse of this industrial hell, that question was far more terrifying than death itself. In the days that followed, I began to understand that the prison's greatest weapon was not the guards, nor the ceaseless labor, nor the starvation, it was the mind itself. The walls, though made of steel and stone, were designed to corrode thought, to make reality a shifting, unreliable companion. Isolation cells stretched endlessly, their floors cold and unyielding, their ceilings lost in darkness, their walls etched with the scratches of those who had gone mad before me. Time lost all meaning, minutes dragged like hours, hours collapsed into a single, tortuous now. The mind, when left unguarded, became its own jailer. It started subtly, shadows that lingered too long, whispers from empty corridors, fleeting glimpses of figures that vanished when I blinked. At first, I dismissed them, attributing them to exhaustion or hunger. But soon, I realized the prison fed on fear, magnifying it until reality itself felt uncertain. The other prisoners were no help, they were broken, their sanity fractured in ways that made conversation dangerous. One man, his eyes wide and unseeing, muttered constantly of voices that promised freedom yet threatened death. Another scribbled endless symbols on the walls, claiming they were instructions from entities beyond comprehension. To watch them was to see the inevitable fate of anyone who lingered too long in this place. I began to question my own memories. Faces of loved ones blurred into shadows, moments of hope felt like dreams remembered through a fog of pain. Fear became both companion and predator, and with it came a gnawing, creeping realization: in this prison, the mind could betray as easily as the guards. The simplest thought, an act of defiance, a fleeting desire for freedom, was a spark, and sparks could ignite horrors beyond imagining. Some prisoners, driven to desperation, sought escape through madness, through rituals whispered in the shadows, through deals with forces they could not understand. Many disappeared, their fates whispered about but never confirmed, leaving only terror in their wake. Yet even amidst this psychological abyss, survival demanded adaptation. I learned to guard my thoughts, to speak only in measured tones, to observe without reacting. Small strategies, learned from whispers and cautious observation, became lifelines: a nod to a fellow prisoner, a shared ration hidden in the shadow of labor, a silent understanding that trust was both necessary and lethal. The mind became a battlefield, as dangerous as the physical punishments imposed by the guards. And still, the abyss stared back. Dreams were no longer my own, nightmares seeped into waking life. I questioned whether I was truly awake when I woke, or if the prison had already claimed a part of me while I slept. The whispers grew louder, and I began to hear them even when alone: promises, threats, memories of deeds I could not recall committing. Madness was not a distant possibility, it was an ever-present threat, lurking just beyond the edge of reason. To survive here, one had to embrace the darkness within, or risk being consumed entirely. By the time I had endured a week in this infernal machine, I understood something vital: the prison did not merely punish the body, it hunted the soul. And in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there were no guarantees that the soul could endure. Amidst the unrelenting despair, a shift began to stir, a subtle, almost imperceptible tension beneath the surface of the prison's grim order. The guards had grown complacent in their certainty that fear alone kept the prisoners subdued, but fear is never absolute. Small acts of defiance began to appear, whispered exchanges of information, hidden gestures of solidarity, subtle resistance to the relentless labor. Each act was fraught with danger. Discovery meant not just death, but a slow, excruciating warning to the others. Yet, in the shadows of oppression, the human spirit, stubborn, reckless, and desperate, refused to be extinguished entirely. The catalyst came unexpectedly. One of the stronger prisoners, a veteran of countless campaigns across the galaxy, was dragged away in the dead of night. The official explanation was vague, disciplinary measures, but the other prisoners knew better. His disappearance ignited whispers of revolt, a shared outrage that spread like wildfire in the blackened corridors. Plans began forming in hushed tones, carefully calculated gestures that sought to exploit the prison's flaws. It was no longer mere survival. Now, the question became whether there was a chance, however slim, to reclaim agency, to strike back, to defy a system designed to annihilate. I found myself at a crossroads. Every instinct screamed caution, for the penalty for failure was unspeakable. Yet the fire of rebellion called to something buried deep within, a memory of freedom, of choice, of being more than a numbered shadow in an endless nightmare. Alliances formed cautiously, trust weighed against risk. Every glance, every whispered word carried the weight of life and death. We were forced to study the prison's routines, to map the patrols, to learn the rhythms of despair that dictated every moment of our existence. And with each passing day, the stakes escalated. A single mistake could destroy everything, yet inaction meant the slow suffocation of the soul. Tension spread like a disease through the prisoner population. Small confrontations erupted, often sparked by desperation, hunger, or rage. These skirmishes were never sanctioned, yet they became symbols of resistance, fleeting assertions of self amid totalitarian control. Guards reacted with brutal efficiency, but the cracks were there, subtle, exploitable, a reminder that even the most absolute systems were vulnerable to human ingenuity and defiance. For me, the rebellion was both terrifying and intoxicating. The knowledge that I could act, that I could strike against the forces that sought to crush me, was exhilarating. Yet the fear remained, a constant shadow, whispering that the consequences of failure were more than physical. They would strip away not just my life, but my very sense of self. In the grim darkness of this industrial hell, rebellion was not a choice, it was a test of the soul. And as I prepared to take my first steps toward defiance, I realized the ultimate truth. In a world designed to destroy hope, even a flicker of resistance could ignite a blaze that would consume everything. The prison erupted with chaos like a storm unleashed from the warp itself. The careful whispers, hidden plans, and subtle acts of defiance ignited into a full-scale revolt. Prisoners surged from their labor lines, armed with whatever tools and scraps they could seize, metal rods, broken machinery, improvised weapons, and the air became thick with the stench of sweat, blood, and burning oil. Shouts and screams reverberated through the endless corridors, blending with the mechanical roar of guards and the crushing weight of the industrial prison around us. There was no elegance in this rebellion, only raw, desperate fury. The guards responded with merciless precision. Bolters roared, flamers scorched, and power fists crushed indiscriminately. Many prisoners fell instantly. Others, driven by desperation or madness, fought until their bodies were broken and still they rose again. The clash was not only physical but psychic. Some prisoners had been tainted by warp exposure, their rage and fear manifesting as horrific, reality-warping phenomena. Corridors bent, shadows moved independently, and the screams of the dying seemed to echo from impossible distances. Survival became a nightmare of instinct versus overwhelming force. In the heart of the chaos, I faced the ultimate choice: to act, to seize an opportunity that might turn the tide, or to retreat and cling to the fragile hope of life. Every decision carried consequences not only for myself but for those who trusted me, for those who had dared to ignite the spark of resistance. And then I saw it, the source of the prison's true horror. Hidden deep within the complex was a machine, ancient and terrible, feeding on the fear, suffering, and psychic energy of every soul confined here. It had endured countless cycles of cruelty, its mechanisms growing stronger with each act of despair. The revolt, for all its fury, had awoken something far older and far deadlier than any mortal guard. The final moments became a blur of terror, courage, and instinct. Prisoners and guards alike fell before the machine's destructive power. Minds shattered, bodies were incinerated or crushed, and the very structure of the prison seemed to convulse with its hunger. I fought not just for survival, but for the faint, impossible hope that some fragment of humanity might endure. Every heartbeat was a defiance, every breath a claim to existence in a place designed to deny it. And as the machine's terrible influence spread, I realized the staggering truth: in Warhammer 40K, there are no true victories. The act of surviving is itself a temporary defiance against forces beyond comprehension, and even victory is haunted by unimaginable cost. When the dust settled, few remained. The corridors were littered with the fallen, bodies twisted in ways that defied human understanding. The prisoners who survived were irrevocably changed, physically, mentally, spiritually. The machine still hummed, its purpose partially fulfilled, yet its hunger remained. The rebellion had not destroyed it, it had only reminded the galaxy of the depths of cruelty and terror that Warhammer 40K prisons could wield. In that moment, survival felt hollow, victory impossible, and the shadows of the prison deeper than ever. When the chaos finally subsided, silence fell over the prison like a shroud. The air was thick with smoke, the metallic tang of blood, and the acrid stench of burning machinery. The corridors, once alive with the echoes of labor and fear, were now haunted by the remnants of the rebellion, bodies twisted beyond recognition, broken weapons, and the lingering whispers of souls lost to the abyss. Only a handful of prisoners remained, each carrying the invisible scars of what had transpired, minds stretched to the brink, bodies battered, and spirits indelibly marked by a horror that would never truly leave them. I walked among the remnants, seeing in every hollowed eye the reflection of my own survival. Some stared blankly, too broken to speak, others muttered fragments of prayer or memory, trying to reclaim a fragment of who they once were. The machine, ancient and malevolent, still pulsed quietly in the depths, a reminder that the prison's hunger was far from sated. We had survived, but survival here was not victory. It was merely a continuation of suffering, a temporary reprieve in a galaxy that demanded sacrifice, obedience, and despair in equal measure. And yet, amidst the devastation, there remained a flicker of understanding. The prison had stripped us of everything: our names, our dignity, our illusions of safety. But it could not take entirely the knowledge of what it demanded, nor the awareness of our own endurance. We had glimpsed the depths of cruelty, confronted the abyss of our own minds, and faced forces beyond comprehension. Some of us would endure, some would not, and those who survived carried with them the bitter truth: in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, hope is not a gift, it is a choice, and every choice carries the weight of impossible consequences. As I looked back on the ruined corridors, the endless machinery, and the empty cells, I realized that the question I had asked upon arrival remained: what is prison like in Warhammer 40K? The answer was both simple and terrifying: it is a place where humanity is tested, corrupted, and consumed, where survival is measured not in victory, but in the fragile ability to endure, where hope is both the most dangerous weapon and the cruelest temptation. And as the smog of the industrial horizon swallowed the remains of our rebellion, I understood that the true horror of this universe was not the violence, the torture, or even the warp-tainted machines. It was the certainty that no matter how far we struggled, the prison, and what it represented, would endure long after we were gone. In Warhammer 40K, imprisonment is eternal, suffering is inevitable, and the mind is never truly free. And perhaps that is the darkest truth of all: in a galaxy defined by war, humanity itself is the ultimate prisoner.